What's going on, everybody? David Elliott here, and in today's video, we're going to do a deep dive into finding subject to and seller finance leads through Propstream. If you are not familiar with Propstream, it is an investor's software, and it allows us to have a greater look into further property details, such as years of ownership, remaining mortgage balance, linked properties, comps in the area, and other useful information. If you do not have access to Propstream, you will find a link in the description below of this video. It is a massive discount. I believe it's about $40 off compared to the original subscription price that you will find through Propstream's website. So check it out. You'll save a lot of money. And let's go right into this video. This is going to be a live demonstration, and we're going to find some sub-to leads. So the first thing that you want to do is, depending on the state that you are working in, whether you are planning to wholesale this property or you are taking it down yourself, it is generally recommended that you filter by county. So filter and search by the county of your interest. Do not use the town or the city, as you will have a greater search area when you are going through a county setting. So let's click on this one, for example. Now, since we are doing subject to, I'm going to go through the search options with you in terms of what it is that I use specifically when doing sub-to acquisition leads. So for owner-occupied, I use any. It does not matter to me whether or not it's owner-occupied or not. For occupancy, it makes no difference to me. If you're trying to target specifically a retail buyer as opposed to an investor, then you would want to click yes for owner-occupied. And if you're trying to target investors only, then you would click no. So for property characteristics, I'm generally looking into the residential area. You will have property types. In this case, we have single-family, condo, townhouse, and different levels of multifamily. We can do all types. Some people will stay away from condo and townhouses due to the HOA restrictions or HOA fees. And honestly, it does not make a difference all that much as long as you have proper creative terms. So for bedrooms, let's go with 3 beds and 2 baths. Now you can do a 2-bedroom and you can do a 1-bath, but if you are looking to acquire a property that's going to be worthy in the sense that you can either do dispositions with it and have a lot of buyers look at it and want that type of property, or something that will have value over time, generally speaking, a 3-2 will always do a lot better than a 2-1. So for building size, I typically don't look for anything under 1,200 square feet. I think 1,200 square feet is a pretty good bare minimum for most people, whether they plan on living in the property themselves or they're looking to rent it out. Can you go below 1,200 square feet? You absolutely can. I personally prefer to stay at 1,200 square feet and up. For lot size, it does not make a difference to me, although you'll see some people maybe put in a max lot size of 1 acre. For year built, I'm looking at 1970 and up. And let's see. Everything else can be unchecked. Now, I do a lot of acquisitions through the MLS. So this might actually be a good tutorial video for those of you who are not spending money through any type of PPC leads. If you're not and you're just looking to acquire properties through the MLS, then what you would want to do is click on yes for on market and listed for sale. Now, this is more if you are acquiring leads, again, through Zillow, for example. Now, if you have your own PPC leads that are coming in either outbound or inbound, then you would just click no for the on market. You would change this to no, and now all of your leads are coming off market. That's what this functionality is telling you. For MLS status, we're going to click active. Some people will include pending and contingent or failed. I don't want to do that. I just want to have a list of properties on my right-hand side that are currently active. I don't want to be spending my time on going after leads that are either pending, contingent, You will see a lot of people go after failed listings, but for the sake of demonstration, we're going to stick to active only. Now, days on market really doesn't matter. I mean, you'll see a lot of people go for maybe 90 days and up for days on market. It doesn't make any sense for me to target properties that are only 90 days on market. The logic behind that is people are under this belief that a seller is willing to accept creative finance if they're 3 months on market, but you can never really put yourself in the shoes of the seller. Motivation changes for every single individual, and to say that now they're magically going to accept your creative offer, whether subject to or seller finance, after 90 days has hit, that's kind of ludicrous. I have locked up properties personally that were literally 2 weeks on market, and it was simply because the terms presented were extremely presentable, and that they liked it and they understood that they would make more money through our creative offer, plus they were motivated. So at the end of the day, it really comes down to motivation, and you can never put your own interpretation of when a seller will be motivated to sell. So days on market, there is no minimum. For the listing amount, there is no minimum or max. Generally, though, you will see people stay at maybe $1 million or less for the listing amount, as that is a lot easier to either do some sort of dispositions if you're not taking it down yourself. But since we are doing creative finance, you can structure creative terms on really any type of residential property, regardless of the price itself. So for pre-foreclosure, you'll also see a lot of people target subject to transactions for, notice of default or lis pendens. This is just saying that the seller is currently behind on their mortgage statements and that there's arrears caught up, and if arrears on the property itself, and if they don't catch up those arrears, then they will go into a foreclosure. So these are the pre-foreclosure settings. We'll do a separate video on the pre-foreclosure. For now, let's just target leads on the MLS that are not necessarily in a pre-foreclosure state. We will click on all, so this will be a default setting for all. So if it does end up auto-populated on the right-hand side, it's not like we're not including this as a possibility. We're just not going to go into a further dive on this video with the pre-foreclosure setting, but it will be included within the settings itself. For ownership info, let's do 2 years max. Now, the reason why I'm doing 2 years max for ownership is, generally speaking, if you have a property and it's low equity and they're trying to resell the property, that low equity is usually going to come in with owning that property for a lesser time period. Properties that have been acquired for maybe 5-7 years, it's extremely unlikely that it will have low equity. But at the 2-year mark seems to be a pretty decent average and consideration of whether or not the property will have low equity. And since we are targeting subject to, we will have years of ownership max at 2 years. Now, for owner type, it makes no difference to me. If you want to stay away from corporate, we can stay away from corporate. Corporate would just be an LLC, for example. So why don't we do individuals? Let's see. And then for last sale date and last sales price, that makes no difference to us. Do not over filter your Propstream settings, as you are going to limit the amount of properties that are going to be auto-populated. Now, for lien and bankruptcy and divorce status, we'll keep this unchecked for the time being. Right now, it's under a default setting for all. For valuation and equity info, I am going to keep that off as well, although you will see some people put down 20% estimated equity max. So that would be this box over here. You'll also see about maybe 15% max. I'm not going to do that, because the more settings that you put into your search box here, the greater limitations that will auto-populate. And so me personally, I'd much rather have a general search criteria that's broad enough where I'm not over filtering, so that any potential leads that would work under sub 2 are not being disregarded as not a potential lead. And now let's go over to mortgage info, and we're going to put down 1. Let's keep it simple. the max you could probably do is 2 mortgages on the property for subject to. But because we're trying to just work with one lender, let's just keep it with one. For the interest rate, we're right now at a 7%, a little over 7% interest rate for a 30-year term as of the recording date of February 1st. And so generally speaking, I'd want to stay at 5.5 or less as the interest rate. So we are essentially done. And this seller carryback here at the bottom, this is referring to equity. So this is really all you need for subject to. So I would take a quick screenshot of this. This is more than enough. If you over-filter your Propstream search options, you're going to limit the unique properties that auto-populates. Again, there are some folks who will target, for example, the estimated equity or the LTV. I'm going to keep that unchecked just because I know that if the property itself is owned for 2 years or less, it has a much greater likelihood of having low equity as opposed to a property being owned for, let's say, 3 to 5 years. Now, can the market dip at any point in time? Absolutely it can, but it is unlikely at that stage of the property's life cycle that it'll be in a low equity state. You'd have to have some sort of major market cycle like what happened in 2008. So these are the search results. Let's go over here to our 2 properties of interest. Let's click on the first one. I see here that it has a length of ownership of 1 year, 8 months, so that's good. I see here, according to the MLS, it's currently listed at $925, and it has a mortgage of 4.25% or less, with an estimated loan balance of $762. So this isn't too bad. A quick way to figure out whether or not this is going to be suitable for subject to is to take 10% of whatever the list price is. So in this case, it's $925, and if you take 10% of that, that'd be $92,000. But let's just put that into our calculator here. That puts us at $832. So we have an estimated balance here of $762, which means they still have equity. So normally when I'm looking for subject to leads, I want to take the list price, take away 10%, and if I can give all of the seller's equity at closing, then that is a perfect sub to. That would be 100% sub to, and there would be no seller carryback. So in this example, there is going to be a seller carryback, because if I give the seller 10% down on the equity that they do have, they'd still have a seller carryback of about $70,000. So there would be a note in second position for the remainder equity that the seller is owed. So I hope you followed that. So generally speaking, for subject to, the rule of thumb is take the list price, subtract 10% from that. You could go up to 12. So maybe we'll do that instead, because that's still a doable option. Let's take 925, take away 12%. You can still see that even with $111,000 down to the seller, they still have a lot of equity remaining, and that equity would be in second position. So for subject to, I want to give all of the seller's equity up front. Let's move on to the next property here. 4.16 interest, estimated loan balance of $193. Let's take a look at the MLS status. We can see here that even if I were to take 10 or 12% of the current list price, that there's still going to be a lot of equity. So these types of deals are definitely possible. And I will say that generally speaking, when the days on market is approaching 90 days or greater, the seller will actually have a greater likelihood of accepting what's called a hybrid deal. Under a hybrid deal, the seller would get a portion of their equity up front, which in this case could be 10 or 12% of their existing equity, with the remainder equity being paid out, on or before a set time period. So it would be a combination of subject to the existing mortgage of 4.16% interest rate. You would take over the estimated loan payment. This is just principal and interest. This does not include taxes and insurance. And then you would have a separate monthly payment to the seller on the equity that's owed. So in this example here, this is a good one for hybrid. This is not something that I would target right away. You can make an offer on a property such as this, as it does not hurt to make an offer. Just know that it is unlikely for them to accept something at 90 days or less, considering that they do have quite a bit of equity and they may want to wait around for a conventional offer through cash or another retail buyer who's looking to go the Fannie Mae conventional way. So let's move on to a different county, because these two properties, these search results here were limited. I'm going to use the same search results and we're going to move into a different county and see if we can get a property result that is unique to subject to. So I see here an estimated mortgage balance of $376. Let's go over to the MLS. $449 is the listing price, 14 days on market. So if you take 10% of this, that would be about $45,000. So $45,000 subtracted from the $450 would put us at $405. $405 minus the $376 estimated balance would be the remaining equity that the seller is owed. So this is a lot better in terms of potentially taking this down for subject to only. You don't necessarily have to give the seller the equity that they currently have, as the listing price doesn't really reflect the equity that they have. You would really have to look at comps, look at the estimated value of the property as is. But if you want to get an idea of whether or not this is going to work for subject to, just take 10 or 12% of the current list price. And if you can give all that equity as a down payment to the seller, then it is a perfect subject to. In this case, it is a hybrid, which is fine. In this scenario, you have two options. Your first scenario is take the property over subject to. In this case, they have a 5% interest rate. You take over the estimated loan payment. You'd give them about 10% down. So that would be $45,000 down. $405 minus the $376 would be the remaining equity according to the list price. That equity would be in second position, and they would also have a monthly payment to the seller. So that would be your first option for a hybrid. Now, if you wanted to, I suppose you could just take down the property subject to as a whole and not give the seller any type of equity. So what I mean by that is we could take $376 and add $45,000, and that would put us at a purchase price of $421. So that would be your second option. So if you wanted to avoid paying the seller's X amount of equity, you could literally purchase the property at $421, give them the $45,000 down, and now you don't have a position, a second note in second position from the seller's equity. So that would be your second option there. And that would probably be the way that I would go, just being that dealing with one note is always easier than dealing with two notes involved for creative finance. So I might try out at $421. And this is the same logic for people who are paying cash, or they're paying through, or they're going through a conventional, FHA, VA route. Retail buyers, just like investors, want a discount on the property. And so if you can purchase this at $421, now you've got a property that is 100% subject to, and not having a second note with the seller's equity in second position, which would be the seller finance portion. So let's move on to the second property here. I see it's listed at $550 with a mortgage balance of $460. All right, let's take the same principle here. So we could see here that there's going to be equity involved. So if you take $55,000 from the current list price, that would put us at exactly $500,000. And there is an estimated loan balance of $460,000, which tells us that we have about $40,000 of remaining equity. So this is still a hybrid deal. So let's keep going until we actually find a perfect subject to deal. All right, we got 18 properties here. Through the same filtration settings, nothing has changed. And so we should have a much greater likelihood in this particular county in finding something. Okay, this might actually work. So this one here is listed at $200,000 and it has an estimated balance of $160,000. It's got a 5.11% interest rate. So let's take 200,000, 10% of that, which is going to be 20 grand. That put us at 180. They got an estimated balance of 160. So they have about, looks like 20% equity remaining in the property, if I'm doing my math right. Yeah, so they have about 20% equity on the property. So this would be another hybrid deal. Now, again, you have two options. Take it down at the 180 as opposed to 200,000, which is their list price, or pay the seller's equity, but as a second position note. Let's go on to the next property here. This one here is listed at 352 with an estimated balance of 298. So we can see here that we're getting closer in terms of how much equity is actually available to the seller. So it looks like this might actually work for subject to. So let's do the math out here. 352.9 for the sake of example. The seller has about $54,000 of equity. If you were to give the seller 10% down at their current list price, that would be $35,000. Of the $35,000, there would be a remainder loan balance of $19,000 or $19,000 of equity. And so your option here again, one of two things: either pay the $19,000 of equity as a second note, or purchase the property at $19,000 subtracted from the current list price. So in this case here, it would be 352.9 minus 19,000, and you'd be buying the property at 333.9. So let's keep going. I want to see if we can actually find us a perfect subject to deal. This one here has about $100,000 worth of equity, so we're going to skip that one. We're going to skip this one. This one here looks like it would be extremely suitable. So if we take 205, which is essentially the list price here, take away 175, 468, and you have about $30,000 of equity according to the current list price. So if we gave the seller $20,000 down, they only have about $10,000 left in terms of a seller finance position note. You could purchase the property at $195. You may be able to pay 10 grand up front. Let's see what that would look like. They have about $30,000. So let's take $30,000, divide that by 205. That means you would be putting down 14.6% down with the seller. So this is your down payment to the seller. So we generally speaking, we want to be at 10 or 12% down to the seller. This one's a little bit high, but still possible. Let's keep moving forward though. I'm sure we'll find something that's 10 or 12% down to the seller. quite a bit of properties here. I'm going to keep going through these until I find something that is suitable. That last one may have worked for subject to as well, but I want to find something where there is no second position note. Okay. This may work. It's listed right now at $260. Take away $235. That puts us at $25,000. So this would be a perfect subject to deal. So I'm going to do that real quick for you again. It's listed at $260,000. If you were to give the seller $26,000 up front, so let's take 260 minus 26,000, that puts us at 234. The estimated loan balance is also 234, which means the seller is receiving all of their equity at closing. So this would be a perfect subject to lead that we can make an offer to, especially being 110 days on market, and there would be no note in second position for seller finance. So this concludes this quick demonstration for Propstream usage and going through the filtration settings here for subject to potential leads. Do not over filter this setting. As we can see here that we've got 18 properties here to go through, which is what we want. Even if we have a hybrid scenario, do not steer away from hybrid scenarios. Make the offer, because the seller's motivation will change from day to day. And if they are willing to take that equity that does remain at a later point in time, then that is great for you, regardless of there being a second position note. So this concludes this video. On part 2, we will dive into seller finance and we will go through the Propstream settings for seller finance.